10 years ago, you couldn't even talk about the Israel lobby. Today, we can. We do. It's explosive, it's controversial, but we do. I wrote an article for the New York Times at the time of the Mearsheimer Walt essay came out, in which an op-ed, and they asked me for this, and I said, you should have written about the Mearsheimer Walt. They had not said anything. And they agreed, which was already a change, but they insisted that somewhere in the article I identify myself as a Jew, because this would give them protection. Controversial article about the Israel lobby. Yes, but he's Jewish, it's okay. That's where we are. Here we have to come back to something else. It wasn't always like this. It began in the 70s. With the rise of identity politics in this country, where it became fashionable and eventually politically and economically normal for people to think of themselves as Black Americans, Italian Americans, Irish Americans. No one says, I'm a Jewish American. If someone says, you're a Jewish American, it has a slightly uncomfortable air to it. But they have to have an identity, the sense of the need to have the same kind of cultural identity as Italian Americans or Black Americans or Hispanic Americans have, has created in the American Jewish community two external identification tags. One is Israel, and the other is Auschwitz, so to speak, one in space and one in time. To be a Jew is to be moved by the memory of the Holocaust and to identify with Israel, even if you have no personal connection with the Holocaust and you've never been to Israel, which is true for most of them. The result is that they are extraordinarily sensitive, politically and personally. It's not an invented political thing. People feel this, to any suggestion that there is criticism of Israel or forgetting of the Holocaust, because it touches the core identity of American Jews.
Do you agree with Mearsheimer and Walt that the influence of the pro-Israel lobby was important for going to war with Iraq?
I do, but I would not have presented it the way they did, because I think that they underestimate ideas and they underestimate, if you like, emotions. They're very cold and realistic in their view of politics. And for them, since going to war with Iraq is absolutely crazy, and it was pretty obviously crazy for many of us before, there must have been some pressure to do something so irrational. And of course there was, but they underestimate other factors. The illusion, for example, that we could have control of Iraq's oil and of the strategic region. The belief, which is a deep American belief, which was not invented by the Jewish lobby, that America knows how democracy should work and is an example to the world and has a moral duty and certainly a right to bring this example to the world. And it's all mixed together. So ideals, belief about American exceptionalism, American duties, American provincialism, not knowing about what's going on outside, and Israeli pressure, yes. America has become part of the Israeli victim narrative. It began, I think, in the 70s, when one of the ways in which the African American community could begin to get amends for slavery and the consequences of slavery was by emphasizing that it was a victim of history. That even if you didn't do it, history did it. Your grandparents did it. It's not a personal responsibility, but there's a cultural debt. And the Holocaust, of course, is the ultimate victim narrative. And David Ben-Gurion, the first Israeli prime minister, knew this very well because he turned it to advantage, giving Israel as a whole country a victim narrative. If you can't criticize someone because he himself is a victim, what do you do with the whole country, which is a country born of victimhood, so to speak? I have been in conversations many times with people who are very reasonable and would say, yes, you're right. Israel does do bad things. The occupied territories, stealing the water, stealing the land, bombing the houses, etc. But remember what happened to the Jews. There is a background, there is a history, there is a reason, there is an excuse for this. And of course, you can say the same thing for the Palestinians. Remember what happened to the Palestinians after the Nakba in 1948 and so on, 1967. No wonder they have suicide bombers. You can always do this. There's always a relationship between collective past suffering and present individual actions. To turn that into public policy, though, is catastrophic, and that is what we see today. Remember the Roman Empire. For a long, long time, the state of Judea behaved in ways which annoyed the Romans but didn't do them any harm. At the point at which they were becoming a nuisance, the Romans turned against them, destroyed their temple, wiped them out, and told them, an empire has bigger concerns than you. This is what Israel faces in the next 25 years. The risk that the American empire will say, wait a minute, you don't matter to us so much. Either because we need oil more than we need you, or because oil is no longer important. Doesn't matter, both is the same effect. You are more trouble than you are worth, and the issue of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism is declining with the demographic move to the next generation. This is a catastrophe for Israel, because Israel has no other friends in the world.